Jessica said, my name is Jen Schotke. I am the Vice President of Operations with the Associated Builders and Contractors Western Michigan chapter in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I am a proud woman in construction. I want to first just say a thank you to Windemuller and for their focus and priority on building up women and demolishing our glass ceiling. Thank you for putting on this event and for encouraging us to have candid and open conversations about opportunities and obstacles. To my fellow women on the call, I also want to say just congratulations and thank you. We represent about 10% of the entire construction industry. And so you are part of the trailblazers that are making way and creating spaces in which we belong in the construction industry. So thank you for being a part of it. To the men on the call, I want to say thank you. 47% of women in the construction industry have never had a female mentor or manager, and only 13% of construction businesses are owned by women. So men, that means you are a critical and vital part of this conversation because you are our mentors and our managers. And we need you to listen and understand the obstacles and opportunities because you bring us up into your organizations and allow us to demolish that glass ceiling and get us into leadership positions. So thank you and welcome to this panel discussion. We have three amazing panelists today, and I'm going to invite them each to introduce themselves. I'd like to begin with Kathy Warren of the Greater Michigan Construction Academy. Welcome, Kathy.
Hi. So a little background on myself. I, number one, have always kind of been kind of the oddball girl, I guess. I would follow dad around and want to help him with stuff and crawl underneath the car and want to know what he's doing. And eventually I did go to college. I got a degree in business administration, but that isn't really what I ended up doing. I ended up hiring into Dow Corning under the production maintenance. So I was a chemical operator for a few years, and then I had the opportunity to get into an apprenticeship for the pipe fitter welder program. That has helped me immensely with not only just learning a trade, but that trade carries over to also everyday life and being a homeowner and how to take care of things and fix things possibly around your home. That if I wouldn't have done that, there's no way I would probably even attempt anything. So it's been valuable in many different avenues. I just recently retired in May of 2020, and I also have the opportunity now to work with two fellow Dow Corning employees in the welding department. And one of them was the welding instructor, and the other was a fellow tradesman. And so that's a new venture, and I'm really enjoying helping the kids. And the challenge there, number one, is you're a female in there, and so first of all, you got to get their trust that you know what you're doing. And I think I'm getting there. I can see them warming up a little bit, which is a good thing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Rachel Austin of EV Construction. Rachel.
I had to unmute. So my story is that I literally grew up in the industry. My mom and dad got divorced when I was pretty young, and I spent a majority of my time with my dad. He didn't leave me with a sitter all the time, and he's a mechanical contractor. He owns the company. And I spent a lot of time as a little girl riding around in his truck, spending time in his shop, steering clear of like a sheet metal break, watching ductwork and gas piping being fabricated, and like sweeping up scrap metal and putting it in 5-gallon buckets to take to the scrapyard. Unlike most women, I never really questioned if I belonged in the industry because I was literally raised in it. I also had the chance to see the business side of things that, the things that keep owners up at night, drumming up the work, if you get too much work, deciding who you might have to disappoint and how to deliver that message. Employee issues, taking calls at all hours, cash flow, all that kind of stuff. And then, yeah, after high school, I went to college and I got my degree in construction management and a degree in business. About 10 years later, I ended up going back to school for my MBA. But out of college, I went to work for a structural steel fabricator and erector, and yeah, worked for a female president and CEO. That was a really fantastic experience. I moved to Grand Rapids about 10 years ago, worked for another general contractor for about 6 years, and then I've been at AV for about 4 years. And I manage our self performed trade divisions here. So I have a constant interaction with our field forces, and truly like the boots on the ground and the people that are building the buildings, not just managing the process. And I do have the opportunity to serve on our leadership council here at EV, and that's, that's my background.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We're so glad you're here and part of the conversation. All right, lastly, our third panelist is Steve Huizinga. And if you're wondering why in the world is Steve Huizinga an expert on women in construction, well, I can't wait for you to find out. So welcome, Steve. Thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Jen. So my story, down and dirty, because there's a lot, there's not enough time for everybody to hear my whole story, but I'm a third generation plumber and pipe fitter. I'm a college dropout. I'm a recovering addict. I'm a convicted felon, and I have passion for diversity and changing the narrative of what and how our business is made up of. Being third generation, we've always looked at improving each generation, and I've just taken the stuff my grandpa did. My dad improved on that, and now I'm taking what he's done in our family and continually looking at improving. And one thing we're constantly looking at improving is our diversity. And when it comes to not just gender, but also race.
All right, thank you and welcome, Steve. All right, so let's get into it. The first question that I have for our panelists today is what hurdles or challenges have you experienced and how have you overcame them? And Rachel, I'm going to go to you first, if we may, if you can talk about just a little more about your story and entering into the workforce, what hurdles and challenges have you had?
So perception is certainly one of them. I am a little bit of a girly girl, so that sometimes doesn't fit perfectly into the industry. And the way that I've found to overcome that is just owning your role. Being competent in your role, doing your research, having your stuff together, and that performance just speaks for and I have had several situations where, the even though, my competence, my skill set, my experience was, just as great or better than, a male counterpart, where people doubt you, and um, you really just you don't need the people that doubt you surrounding you. You'll start to create that self-talk in your own head. And honestly, those are not your people. So move on.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Kathy, I want to ask you the same question. So, as you were entering the trades at Dow Corning, what were those early hurdles and obstacles that you faced, and how did you work to overcome those with your peers?
The biggest fear I had was fear of failure and fear of not being accepted. And because you're in number one, you're working with a male dominated trade, uh, and you just don't feel you're going to measure up. So, in one essence, it made me try harder. I think you tried harder so you would be accepted. Um, I I found that as long as you are willing to learn and they can tell that you really want to do this work and do the job, everybody's going to share every bit of information and try to help you succeed. And I really did not have any issues for the most part. There was probably one or two that I ran into an issue with, and I ended up just confronting them one day. And after that, everything changed. I wasn't a jerk about confronting them. I asked them very nicely, and I think I caught them off guard. So sometimes it's the way you approach things, and so the way you approach it, and the attitude you have, I think can bring you success.
Absolutely. Confidence is certainly one of the most important things any gender can have in the work that they're doing. And I totally agree with you. Kathy, I loved a story you told me 2 days ago about an asset that you brought as a woman in the trades, and it was about where you could fit. Will you tell that story again?
Oh, yeah. So as a woman in the trade too, number one, I don't care how much I've worked out since I've been 16, 17, and there was actually a time in my life when I competed also. Well, it doesn't matter how much I work out, I'm not going to be as strong as a man, correct? I mean, number one, most of them are twice my size. But you still carry your load, right? You're hauling things upstairs. 9 times out of 10, they always took the heaviest portion of it because that was that was the same as it was to me, the lighter weight. So with that in mind too, also sometimes these spaces we had to work in were quite tight and small. Well, that's where I came in, and they would just shove me in those spaces, and or I'd volunteer because I knew that they couldn't move. They couldn't move. They couldn't fit their hands in something. I've got smaller hands, and so sometimes it's a benefit too. I mean, it did work out to their advantage at times too. So it's just a matter of what are you capable of, what can you do, what can you bring to the table, and bring it. And everybody has their strengths and everybody has their weaknesses, and hopefully you can flourish off of everybody's strengths and be a good working team.
Absolutely. Kathy, I love that so much. For all the time I spend thinking about diversifying the industry, I never had that mental picture of the fact that the diversity of size can be such an asset that, those smaller spaces are better for obviously somebody who is more petite. So I just loved that story when you shared it with us. Thank you so much. Steve, all right, I know you haven't experienced any obstacles as a woman in the industry, but I will never forget the day you called me. Must have been a couple of years ago now, and you said, Jen, I've realized I want to increase the gender diversity in my organization, and I'm going to do it. And so, talk to us just about those early days of thinking about allied mechanical services and how you wanted to diversify your staff, and what were those early obstacles that you had to overcome?
So everybody in our industry knows we're going to have a talent gap, and we're all trying to figure out how to fill that talent gap. And we are always talking about how are we going to get more manpower, how are we going to get more manpower. And I started thinking, go, wait a sec, we just rules out half the population with how we're already wording things. Versus people, it's how are we going to find more manpower? And we started thinking 50% of the population, we're already thinking can't do the trade, or we're already even just in our verbiage, we're ruling that population out. And I started thinking, why are we doing that? What typically has been the barriers there? I think about how my dad did the trade, my grandpa did the trade, how I did the trade, and it was way more physical. There wasn't the technology. It's so much easier to get over some of those physical barriers um, that used to be there. And so we just said, you know what? We're going to start pursuing this other 50% and start figuring out how to make it work. How do we get them excited about the trades? How do we let them know there's a great career here? And it's just kind of snowballed after that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great segue to my next question, which really is about some of this perception and belonging. So, the next question is, what do you think keeps women and young girls, students thinking about construction from entering the field? Rachel, can I go back to you to answer this one first? What do you think are some of those barriers to women entering the field?
I think not even knowing what's out there and what's available. I think that there is some level of perception that to be in the industry, you have to be boots on the ground, swinging a hammer, doing, I'll say, that type of field work. And there's this whole category of, um, more office based, that type of work that people don't even know what really goes into it. I think of an example. One of my colleagues shared with me recently that his wife was like, "Well, until we got married, I didn't really know like who built hospitals and who built them all and all of those types of things. And it's just not on some people's radar. And yeah, and then there's also am I going to fit in? How is that, going to work? Where do I even start? I think that those are all things that may hold women back.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. We are one of few industries that's really like a friends and family network. If you ask a tradesperson in particular in our industry, how did you get into construction? They're usually going to reference, oh, it was like my dad or my uncle or my brother or my cousin or a friend or my aunt, like somebody in their network knew about this kind of mysterious industry that is our great construction industry. So, yeah, I agree with you. And I think part of what we need to do is like spread the good word, right? Grassroots. We need to talk to our daughters and nieces and sisters and aunts and women who are in our network about what it is we do and that there is a really great place to belong in this industry. Steve, can I kick it to you on this question as well? So, as you have worked to recruit women into your business, what are some of those things you hear about women entering, especially the trades, I think?
Um, as far as like when we hire them, or
Yeah, even recruiting. Like, have you run into anything where women are like, "Oh, I don't think that that's the field for me."
a lot of it is the physicalness. A lot of them think they can't do it, which we like to we encourage when we bring in females, we encourage them to use the gifts they have. I mean, we tell them don't try and be a man. Use your natural gifts that's given you because we are different no matter what. Yeah, there are some physical things possibly that a female won't be able to do that a male can do, but they're also going to problem solve, I think, better. They handle their emotions better. They handle conflict better. They do a whole bunch of things. I think though they will. I know for a fact they care more as far as like you get a female in the service industry, like a service tech or something like that. They're going to care for the customer better. So we encourage them to use the gifts that comes naturally to them. And yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help. And we also tell them don't try and fit in. Don't try and be a man. I mean, use what God gave you. Use your gifts that you're going to naturally be better at than us men.
Thank you, Steve. That segues into the next question. And I do want to remind our attendees that please chat in questions. We'll ask the questions that we see that go into the chat box. If you'd like to ask anything, a broad question, or even to any one of our panelists, I'll be watching that and be sure to weave those questions into the chat as well. So the next question is simple but complex. Why is diversity important to you and to your organization? Steve, I'm going to keep it to you on this one. Do you want to talk about why diversity matters to you, and maybe some of uh, those those unconscious benefits? Those things that you didn't expect to happen once you started to really work on diversifying your organization.
So if I diversity is at just such a beautiful piece to our business. You know, we we always want to look at improving, and to improve, I got to bring in people who don't always think like me, act like me. Well, for sure not act like me, but and to do that, you need to bring in a diverse workforce. And um, the beauty of that is we always say we're going to hire culture ads, not culture fits. If I were to do culture fits, I would hire a bunch of white 40-year-olds who in this area are Dutch, right? That's what I do. But we can't improve that way. I mean, we encourage just by looking at different genders, by looking at different race, it adds just a whole new outlook on our business and a whole different input in how we do things and what we do. And one of the unintended consequences is actually it's in our sheet metal shop. We have a young lady who's out there banging duck together. She is amazing at it. And one of the unintended consequences was us macho men with our egos. Guess who we don't want to get beat by or outworked by? A female. So it's been interesting watch her back there drive production up, because these guys don't want to be outworked by her, even though she's outworking a whole bunch of them, no matter how hard they try. So that's just been kind of a, oh, look what's happening here.
I love that so much. We read and maybe see white papers, and there's lots of discussion around sort of the business case for diversity, and productivity is often mentioned. But I just appreciate you making that real for us. Like, how does that actually happen? How do we get more productive when we diversify? And I love kind of that natural competitive spirit, I think, that exists in most of us that work in construction. This is a competitive industry, and by diversifying how we work and who we work with, we're able to all kind of rise together. Rachel, talk to me a little bit about EV construction and why diversity and diversifying your workplace has been important.
Um, so like Steve said, if you're hiring people that look like you and act like you and think like you're going to end up with groupthink. You may end up with consensus, but that might not be the best answer. So having a diverse workforce helps us to tap into different thought processes and different ways of thinking and arriving at the best answer, and better than the group thing. And there is that barrier of hiring a female, I'll say, in field forces. And in our field operations, I mean, I'm a part of every interview, and we have several women in our field right now. And I think that having a fellow woman in the interview process and part of their onboarding and integration and all of that, I think that creates a level of comfort for them, that may make us a little unique compared to the rest of the industry. And then also having somebody that is an advocate for them. I have had a couple of situations at different points in time. One specifically I can think of that one of the younger ladies in our field forces had an issue where a trade contractor treated her pretty poorly, and having a woman to call about that issue and not have to feel like she's being a whiner or whatever, and really being heard, and then having somebody in a leadership role to back her up and say, we will not tolerate that kind of behavior in our organization. And yeah, I think that those are a couple things that are a little bit different here.
Yeah, absolutely. I just briefly saw a question pop up in the chat, and it's exactly along the lines of thinking that I had. When ABC or other organizations are going into school systems and talking about careers in the industry, it's so important that we bring in people that represent the students that we're going to see. So whether that's people of color or women or both. Steve or Rachel or Kathy, this question is, are there any programs specifically working to attract women of color in the construction industry? And that's a tough question, and one that I'm not actually sure of, and I'm just curious if there are any programs that any of the three of you are aware of.
I'm not aware
Yeah.
of any
Yeah,
specific programs. I mean, we do a lot with Grand Rapids Public Schools, which I mean that's looking at people of color, not just women specifically. Um, but yeah, I'm not aware of any specific programs for women.
Steve or Kathy, either of you want to comment on that one?
We're involved heavily with ADC, and that tends to add, we have one employee there, and we've mentored there, and that's a very diverse school, and we're starting to see some fruits of investing in there. And when our people mentor there, and that just they love it, but it also adds that other option to diversify your workforce. And I speak in quite a few schools also. My story is unique. Yeah, the coming up through the trades to my role, that's a little unique. But the minute I'm in front of a bunch of kids and say I've been to jail and I'm a convicted felon, but I'm also the president of a business, it perks their ears up. So then I get to draw them in, and that's where I tell females that you guys can kill it. I mean, if a female decides to get into construction, that is a pretty definite decision. A lot of the young men we get, I think I might want to try this or not try this, but when you get a female that wants to get in construction, they usually come out of the gates, they wake up, they show up, they work twice as hard because they've already made that decision. This is what they want to do. And if I put two apprentices if I start them neck and neck, one male, one female, the female always outperforms quite quickly because they're quite driven to be in this trade once they make that decision.
Great. Thanks, Steve. This next question is from Linda in the chat, and she's asking about ways that women can overcome the overall attitude that we sometimes receive from men in the field that we don't know what we're doing, right? We don't know the field. So there is this feeling that we have to prove ourselves often. Kathy, I'm wondering if maybe you would be comfortable answering this question. So what are some of the ways that you overcame that attitude that maybe you didn't know what you were doing because of your gender?
The way I overcame it, I just try to ignore it at first and just go about your business, I guess, is how I approached it. I just figured that eventually what's going to happen is they're going to realize that you want to do this work. And in all honesty, I didn't really have a ton of problem. As long as you went in there and you had the right attitude and you were asking questions and you were attentive, that's the big thing, is that you were attentive to what they were trying to teach you and you showed interest. As long as you're doing that, I never had really an issue. You got some people, some of the older guys at the time when I was an apprentice that were old school, and they probably thought women shouldn't be in there. But the fact of the matter was that you were, and so they did work with you. It wasn't that they shunned you, they didn't treat you bad. So I don't think that's the mentality really anymore. I just don't. I don't think that's the mentality. I think people are realizing that there's a lot of capability with women, and I think they realize that, number one, as Steve said, they can be out. As a man, you can get outperformed, and so sometimes I think they look at you as a threat, not a hindrance. So it just, as long as you have a good attitude, you keep interest, I don't think you'll have a problem. I really don't.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. So I'm watching the chat, and there's some amazing resources that are popping up. I just want to let you know, as Windemuller is watching this and creating their after program resources, that we'll make sure to include many of these organizations that are popping up. The National Association of Black Women in Construction. I love that. Thank you so much for that resource. So right now, we're going to actually move into our breakout room so that we can have small group conversations. So I'm going to hand it over to Allison at Windemuller, who's going to take us away into our breakout conversations. We'll come back together as a group at the end just for some closing remarks. So thanks to our panelists, and enjoy your small group discussions.
Hi, Jen. Sorry, actually, if you could go ahead and ask a couple of more questions. I'm just
Sure.
up those breakout rooms.
Yeah, I would love to. Okay, panelists, you're back on. You're not off yet. All right, hold on. I'm looking through the questions. Forgive me. Here's one. Do you feel like the younger generation understands the work ethic it takes to keep a job and not job hop? Rachel, you're a hiring manager. Do you feel comfortable taking this one?
Sure. I don't know that the tendency to job hop is exclusive to women versus men. I mean, I do see more more of a tendency to move around from younger people in the industry than some of their elders. And honestly, I take that as a function of supply and demand. I mean, up until the COVID-19 pandemic, we were in pretty good economic times for a really long time, and there were more jobs available than what there are workers. So that gave workers the opportunity to be in the driver's seat for the first time ever. Um, and yeah, that allowed them to, vote with their feet and make different decisions. It drove up the average wage. It has driven up, the amount of money that companies have to place with their benefits. And yeah, to me, that's a supply and demand thing. And it's just, yeah, the younger people came into their careers at the right time for them, maybe not the right time for employers.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. This is a question that I'd like Steve to answer. Steve, this question is, what tips do you have to break the male click barrier to ensure inclusion and not just equality for women? So that spirit of belonging. And I remember you addressing in our pre-call, Steve, just a little bit of like the elevation of professionalism in your organization. Maybe you can talk about kind of that job trailer mentality and how women can break through that male click.
Um, yeah, so they're one thing bringing females in has brought is, of course, it's cleaned up language, it's cleaned up the barroom talk, which has been phenomenal. Um, we have had a couple issues where, you talk about the click. There's also they wanted to fit in so bad they let some of that barroom talk in that trailer, like our, we call allied, our family, like their employees are our family, like within their family they allow that, they step outside of the trailer, it bleeds over. Next thing you know, I have somebody from outside our organization saying something to her because that line has been blurred and she didn't like it. Next thing you know, I got a mess on my hands. So yet there's the fitting in, but there's also the drawing the line and making sure that line is established and stays there. And because it's they want to fit in with our guys, but they also have to realize train, and we're still working through this. I mean, we by no means really know what we're doing yet. We're still, how do we train these young ladies, or not necessarily young, but whoever these females that are coming to work for us, how do I train them of what they're walking into? How do I equip them for and prepare them, and how to we're still, I mean, it's a work in progress. We're not perfect. We always say we always look at progress, not perfection. So and that's where we're at. We're progressing. We're not perfect yet, though.
Yeah,
And something that
absolutely.
I say to a woman coming into the field is what you permit is what you promote. So if you're permitting bad behavior around you, you're inadvertently promoting it. Um, I don't know that advice has a heavy weight with them for a long time after that initial onboarding period. But I mean, I believe it to be true.
Yeah. We had a really great discussion in my breakout room just about belonging. And as women in the industry, what are some of those things that maybe just hadn't even been thought of before by no fault of the industries, right? It's just because we make up a small percentage of the workforce from what are women's bathrooms like, right? There is a difference, right? We need other things than men need in our bathrooms. And that's one way to help women feel like they belong in your organization, to correctly fitting gloves and safety equipment that sometimes the in my research I was reading that one of the barriers for women in the industry is the fact that harness might not fit so well, or maybe their hands are more petite. And one gentleman in my breakout room talked about, he's a safety director, how he actually measured and sent the dimensions for a petite woman in the field who was like 4'11" to his glove manufacturer so she could have gloves that fit. And just like what an incredible experience that was, and how much gratitude she had, again, just to be seen and heard and felt like she belonged. So I really just loved those comments. Let's see, I am looking. Here's one question. So, any tips for when to improve networking in the industry? What a great question. Rachel, what do you do to network in the industry?
I mean, truthfully, nothing that is, specific to women in construction. Um, Quite some time ago, I was part of a NAWIT chapter in the Midland area. And yeah, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, it didn't have a ton of sticking power. But I think with any networking opportunity, it needs to be high value. I mean, if it's just like, let's get together and have a glass of wine and hang out, like, that's a little clubby, and then that ends up being the first thing that when people get busy, it drops off their calendar. Um, so I think having it be high value, engage speakers or facilitators or that kind of thing, so that it's that event that people really say, I'm not going to miss that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing some great resources pop up in the chat. NAWIC, as Rachel mentioned, National Association of Women in Construction is a great one. There's several chapters throughout the state of Michigan. I know some of you are outside of our state, so just look at that national website to see where your local chapter is. Here in Michigan, Inforum, which is a Women in Leadership Association, recently created an architecture, engineering, and construction affinity group, and they have free programming. You don't yet have to be an Inforum member, so go to, I think it's inforum.org, just Google Inforum, and you can find some resources for that affinity group. Let's see. Let me look back at the chat. I love the comment I saw about wearing boiler suits rather than flame retardant pants on gas sites because they were not made for hips. Preach it. And yes, those gloves, the story about the gloves, the woman in the field actually got children's gardening gloves first. And that was how that conversation started. Like, get those off. We got to get you the gloves you need.
Hi, Jen.
All right.
Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. I did have
please.
one message that I thought would be interesting to hear some points on was Melissa had asked, I'd like advice on how to approach an interview if you are a woman and of a diverse background. I have experience from my country, but I have felt rejected.
Any of our panelists want to talk about advice for interviewing?
I guess when you're in the interview, did she say she has experience, but she
Yeah, she said that she does have experience from the country.
feels rejected?
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, she has experience from the country that she lived in previously, but when she goes into interviews now, she feels rejected.
That's a tough one to answer because you just don't know the situation, right? I mean, you don't know what I guess you don't know the whole aura that's going on, right? But pretty much I would have her credentials all laid out. I'd have them all written out. I'd have and go in there and kind of rehearse what you're going to say and let them know you know what you're doing. That's really about all you can do. And you know something, if they're making you feel that way, like you're rejected, that, in my opinion, that's God's way of telling you this isn't the job, this isn't the company you want to work for, right? Because if you have all the credentials and you're laying it out and everything is there for them and you know what you're talking about and you still feel that way, well, then you should get an aura that maybe you need, maybe they're not right for you, right? I mean,
Yeah, I agree. I'm so sorry, first of all, that's happened to you because that is not how that should be.
yeah, no, it isn't, I mean,
Yeah.
so that's, I think that's sometimes I think, because I've had interviews like that too, where you feel you walk out of there and something just wasn't right and you have a bad feeling. And I look at it as that's my hint that I wouldn't have been happy, right? Because if I don't want to work for a company with that kind of feeling, I guess.
Yeah, and I think just be authentic. You don't have to be anything else than you are. And being able to talk about your strengths and the assets that you bring. And I don't know where you're from, but if you're bilingual, I think that is one of the most extraordinary assets because being able to lead in a multilingual crew is an asset I wish I had, and I don't. So I just think if that's where you're at, you're amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming. We had at one point today over 200 people logged on to our Zoom meeting, so that's really great. We will have this recording available to those that came today afterwards, and then we have a lot of great comments in the chat feature with resources and different tips. So those will also be available to everyone. Look for those, I would say, next week. And look for more of this type of activity and events from us for sure in the future. So thanks again.
All right. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Windemuller. Have a great evening,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.